the trauma, not having family, not having, resources, right? If you're born in poverty with no family, with no support, and then trauma on top of that, and then, right, and nowhere to turn, right? Drugs become the only thing to numb you to be able to get through. And then it becomes you're just on that margin, right? A day away from. So yeah, so that's where getting to that root cause of that trauma, right? Instead of waiting for it to explode, right? We know there are folks out there that are hurting. We know that there are people that need us, right? And sometimes it's just that simple. Hey, hi, how are you? Here's a hot dog, right? Not to be corny, but that can be. I really believe that makes a difference, right? And then following that up with actual like therapeutic help. Gosh, we could save so much more trauma, so much more harm, so much money, so much. It could be such a better place, the world.
Thanks for joining this episode of People Are the Answer. I'm so fortunate today to have Bryan Mauk of End It for Good with me. Hey, Bryan.
Hi, how you doing, Jeff?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm wonderful, thank you.
It's great to have you on. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, really, my pleasure, my pleasure. I was listening to a bunch of episodes, excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm excited to kind of get to know you, how you got where you are. I like to start off with a little bit of a difficult one. What in life generally motivates you?
Oh gosh. So I was actually just sharing this quote yesterday, and it's kind of it was actually our prayer for Easter, and there's a really great quote by Pedro Rupe that the sum of it is about falling in love, and the quote is about nothing's more perfect than finding love. It decides what will wake you up in the morning, what will keep you up at night, and what drives you, what brings you happiness, and finding that love and what you love is what it's all about, right? And yes, that's what drives me, right? That finding that love both in family and work, it kind of decides everything, right? And for me, that's that kind of service to others and bringing about a change in our communities, right? And just love it, man. It becomes so much fun when your work and your vocation and your personal life all really come together. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. I definitely think humans in general, we do our best work when it's something we really care about and are engaged in. And, my late father certainly pressed everyone he knew to find something that they love and make the most of that.
Yeah, and
Um,
it's truly,
yeah.
truly lucky and fortunate to be able to do that, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's a wonderful thing to be able to do, and I really appreciate that motivator in your life, and want to learn about where it came from. Where did you grow up, and what was it like there?
Yeah, yeah. So I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. Yeah, had just a wonderful, wonderful childhood. Early kind of on in my life. My father was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and I was about 3 years old. And he made a full recovery. It was wonderful, and we actually, as a family, we refer to it as like the best thing that ever happened to us because it was kind of the moment that the whole life changed and kind of our priorities shifted from to falling in love, right? Finding what was important in life and going after that instead of just kind of caught up in all the other things, right? And so that economically it made a little bit of a challenging time growing up, but personally, spiritually, all that stuff, and from my family perspective, it was really kind of formative for me, right? So that was kind of the very early growth for me, and then really kind of instilled a bit of service and giving back to folks. And when I went to high school, I got involved in a ministry called Labra, and it's a ministry to the homeless, and it's about visiting folks where they live, under bridges and alleyways, that kind of stuff. And it was a ministry of friendship, and just getting to know people, right? So we go and visit folks and bring a hot dog and just a smile. And as simple as it sounds, it was an incredibly powerful experience, both for me as a student, right, going to it and meeting folks, but also for the people we were visiting. It was such a powerful experience. I brought it with me to college and continued to visit folks.
That's a remarkable, and something you said there certainly resonated in terms of little things can have such a big incredible difference in so many people's lives, and you never know like how one little helping hand can just completely revamp someone's existence in so many ways
Yeah,
and
no,
just
and just the
bring
the
warmth.
power of having somebody to talk to, right? I remember there was this lady named Jane who she really kind of just lived in a mud hole with a tarp over it by the railroad tracks on kind of like the side of the tracks you don't want to be on, right? And I remember it was winter and we were walking back and it had snowed a week earlier and there was no footprints in the snow in or out. So she had been isolated alone for 6 7 days, which was crazy to me, right? That people in a metropolis, right, surrounded by hundreds of thousands of people, can go a week without seeing anyone, right? Was crazy to me, and so for many times we'd visit her, she would just hold her hand out, and we'd put the hot dog in her hand, and nothing, right? And then one day we got a hello back, and then one day, how are you? And really, over the course of about 8 years of visiting her every week, we slowly built up that relationship. And one day we were actually having a conversation, and she started talking about her son, and she's like, "I miss my son." And then all of a sudden, she started to get into recovery and change her whole life. And within a couple months, she was in housing, reconnected with her family, and all that stuff, right? So there's
Wow.
that power of relationships, right? I think she had a lot of trauma. There's a whole story
Yeah.
there that's really really difficult, but the what turned it around was just a little bit of human connection, right?
Yeah.
And that was beautiful, and that was like one of those formative experiences for me as a high schooler, right? Like that, just talking to people can make such a huge difference in their life.
Yeah.
So trying to bring that smile, that bubbliness, and help people.
So it sounds like your sort of openness and interest in others was bred in your family, like that came from family.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. I came through family, and then was really kind of reinforced through high school and service, and then eventually trickled into my professional career.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing. It's incredible work that you did in those young years that, I'm sure you learned an incredible amount from as well that contributed to the remainder of your time.
Yeah, it was, and then it really kind of I jokingly refer to it as the kind of stuff that ruins your life, right? Once you start doing that stuff, you just can't stop, right? You gotta keep going with it, right? And it's been ruined for the better. Had plans, and then changed them, and there was another lady that really kind of left her fingerprints on my heart. Was her name was Leslie, and she lived out on the streets as well, and refused to go into a homeless shelter because she believed she was the Queen of Holland, and the Queen of Holland could never be seen in a shelter. That would just ruin the country's reputation, right? And there's really not a lot you can do with that kind of logic. So what we had, what it kind of, so when I was when I was graduating from college now, right, the next thing I did was this was right during the for housing for collapse, right? There was all these abandoned homes, and I saw two problems, right? I saw one, we need a place for people to go like Leslie that isn't a shelter, low barrier, and also there's all these abandoned homes. So we did. I was like, man, if I only had the money, we could fix up these homes. We could teach homeless people construction skills, and then we could use the money from that to fund this drop-in center where people could come. And then somebody called my bluff, and they gave us $40,000 to get started, and that was Bryan's social enterprise number 001. We had like a whole community. We worked down our way down the street and built like a whole bunch of houses together, taught some people some skills,
Wow.
and then had a drop-in center where people like Leslie could come. And it was not a shelter. The Hollands would reputation was intact, and she could come and just be warm. And it was also kind of a really great place where we actually worked a lot with the local police. And if people were drunk or high, they didn't want to take them to prison, right? They didn't want to take them to jail, but they didn't want them to be out on the street, right? Like either they were too cold and they could freeze to death, or they were being a little rowdy, right? So it was a place where they could take them, and kind of got colloquially known as the drunk tank, right? It was just a place for them to come and sober up and be with friends and be safe and be warm. And it helped a lot of people stay out of the system, and then we had counselors and addiction services there to help engage when they were ready. So it was really cool stuff.
You must have seen a lot during that time.
Yeah, there was a couple things, right? But it was, it sounds crazy saying I was 20 at the time. I couldn't even drink, and I was running the drunk tank, right? but for me, right, like these were all my friends, right? I'd been seeing them every Friday. We went out Friday nights, so instead of everybody else was partying, I was visiting homeless people, and these are the folks I knew. They weren't scary. It was just like just like when your uncles had a little too much to drink. It's like, come on, have a seat, right? Yeah. So it was a really wonderful experience, right, to approach with love and
those individuals are so fortunate to, have interacted with you and have had that opportunity for, what you brought into their lives. And I mean, even just at such a young age to have effect on any lives that deeply, much less many of them, is tremendous. So I mean, what an
Yeah, well, it was
incredible start.
certainly mutual, right? There's a lot of them that are
Yeah,
still on my
of
phone. We
course.
still call on birthdays, and it's a really truly friendship, right? Which was awesome
Yeah.
to be able to get there with folks.
Yeah, that's incredible. And so, you mentioned right what you did right after college. What was your college experience like? And I know it sounds like a lot of it was spent volunteering.
Yeah, a lot of it was volunteering. I was originally planning to go pre med. I had been like an EMT a little bit and was doing that kind of stuff. And spoiler alert, I'm not the intellectual titan that can do medical work. So I got weeded out fairly quickly. But I started taking classes just for things that I was interested on the side, and it was a lot of sociology, right? Poverty and poli sci and econ classes, and learning about it, right? So I ended up settling into a sociology major, which was really great, kind of understanding our community, how it works, the bigger forces at play, and how we can, as people, help to influence that, right? And so that was kind of my undergrad, and then grad school kind of came because we got this grant right when I was graduating. I was like, well, I got to figure out how to run a nonprofit now. So I enrolled in the master's degree in nonprofit administration, and yeah, it's been just wonderful.
Yeah. And where were you living at that point?
In Cleveland, yes, I went
Okay.
to John Carroll in Cleveland, and then Case Western, their Mendel Center over there.
Got it. Got it.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And then, you started the social enterprise. It sounds like right after college.
Yeah, went
Um,
right into that and did that for a couple years, which was wonderful. I've got I jokingly call it founder syndrome. I like to found stuff
yeah.
and
Yeah.
build
Yeah.
stuff, right?
I
I've
know
got
that
that
syndrome.
right. It's so got it started and then briefly my girlfriend, now wife, spoiler alert, right, was in Chicago finishing up her law school degree. So I went out there with her for after I finished at grad school, and ran a homeless shelter for Hispanic families. It was kind of a domestic violence shelter, which was another kind of really interesting experience for me to learn. As you can tell, I'm probably a loud person, and being I'm the male staff person at a domestic violence shelter. I had to really kind of put up that kind of interpersonal awareness and radar, right? And but had a wonderful time working with them and helping to kind of run the shelter. But then came back to Cleveland after we all finished school, and got a really great job as a director of social enterprise at a local organization. My job was to start businesses that gave jobs and job training opportunities to folks like homeless and reentry and at-risk teens. So we had a bike rack business where people veterans welded bike racks, right, like that you tie your bike
Yeah.
to. And we had a culinary business where we made 5,000 meals a day for the area homeless shelters, and people
That's
coming back from
awesome.
prison were actually making the meals, and did a culinary arts program. It was pre-release, so 6 months before they're released, they'd come out with an ankle bracelet. We'd give them, put them in the kitchen and teach them training. It actually got certified as a trade school, so they could actually earn an associate's degree through it. I got to introduce myself as Dean Bryan, which was the real reason we did all that. And yeah, and just a bunch of other different enterprises, which was a lot of fun.
That sounds amazing. I mean, I personally am a huge fan of business, and it's an incredible vehicle for change. And I think, giving people, it's like, teaching a man to fish. That saying, giving people these opportunities to learn how to create a sustainable life in that situation is so important. Reentry is certainly an area that's important to me. Is great organization Breakthrough that we've had a couple people on, that's based here in Denver, and I think I'm, as someone with has done a lot of work in criminal justice reform, seeing the eh, what happens can happen to people when they're attempting to reintegrate into society is so sad and difficult. And I really appreciate programs like this that you're mentioning, like, Turn 90. We've had Amy Barch on the podcast as well, and it adds so much value in so many directions. One of my problems with a lot of nonprofits is that they don't add enough value. They're just, it's taking all this time to try to uh, get money donated to you, and that's the number one goal, and that's always the top priority. And meanwhile, you're not paying enough attention to the actual people you're trying to impact or the actual change that you're trying to create. But the great thing about social enterprise is that there's usually some element of sustainability built into it, even if it's not perfect. And
Yeah,
for
just
me,
even
that's
even have that little
yeah,
bit of money that you can be flexible with, right? Is huge. It's
exactly.
game changing for us. I'm a data driven nerd. I really like to look at trends. That's the sociologist in me, I think. And I remember we did a bunch of analysis on our programs, and we had about a 60% graduation rate of the culinary arts program, right? And that's okay. But we boiled it down to the three M's. We called it. The reason people were leaving, right? Money, math, and meth, right? So money, we found that if we did an emergency fund for people, and this is right, that little unrestricted money, right, from our earned income of the enterprise, right? I think it was like $250 a person, right? And they didn't. It was a real low threshold, like my car broke down, right, or I need childcare, I got to pay somebody, right? That was enough to help keep them in the program, right? These little barriers didn't have to happen, right? Meth was just drug counseling to help support people, right? If they relapsed, it was there for them. And then the last one was math, right? So we used to have a math chapter, and it turned out the biggest day that people left and dropped out of the program was the day we said open to the math book, your book to the math chapter, right? So we just got rid of the math chapter. We blended it in to all the different things, and people didn't realize they were learning math, and we didn't lose people, and it boosted the graduation rate from about 60% to about 95%, which was awesome, right?
It's amazing
And
when relatively small change can be so impactful.
yeah, it was these three little things, right? If you need a little bit of money, $250, right? I mean, the whole program was like an $8,000 program, and I couldn't get anybody to agree to add $250 to it because it was just like, well, But it was great to have that unrestricted revenue, right, from the enterprise that we could say take a chance on, right? And it's really cool stuff.
And at the same time, it looks like on my notes here that you started teaching social entrepreneurship at your alma mater.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was a lot of fun. Yeah, yeah. I was teaching social entrepreneurship, which was really, really fun. It was really fun to be with the students and kind of staying close to the craft, but also just like good for me to like stay grounded and all that stuff. And we would workshop. It was the business school, and I was teaching the social entrepreneurship class. So it was like for some of them, it was their only touch into some of the social justice stuff. So I got to baptize them in some of the social justice terminology, and we did field trips to my work, and it was largely like just sharing. Here's what I'm working on today, and students found that pretty engaging, and I enjoyed it too.
Yeah, that's awesome, and it's what an incredible foundation to get rolling from, at a relatively young age. It's pretty incredible. And then in 2018, you moved over to become executive director of PCs for People, and I know from our previous conversation, part of that was you wanted to learn about something else that you could bring back to your other work. So I would love to learn more just about your 6 years at PCs for People, what brought you there, what it was, and what you're taking home from it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and so I've been doing the social enterprise stuff at the LMM, the kind of local organization, and loved it. But it was never going to be a national thing that would move the needle, right? And did feel called out of humility, right, to do something more, right? It was a difficult decision, right? I was doing something really cool, really impactful, but at the same time, right, I've got some skills and talents that could do more, right? So it was a tough decision, but decided to give PCs for People to move there, and it was a wonderful experience to really learn the craft of scaling something nationally. When I joined, there was one headquarters in Minnesota, and there was kind of another office, but it really was like the first real expansion into becoming national. Their budget was about $1.5 million, and then I was blessed to be the executive director of kind of Cleveland, which was our first kind of real new office, and then helped to be the chief innovation officer and grow everything. So by the time we left, it was about a $30 million organization. We had about a dozen different offices. It was wild and a huge amount of growth in about 6 years.
That's amazing. I mean, that's
Yeah, yeah, and it was
incredible.
during COVID too. So it was those
Wow.
COVID years that felt like 15 minutes and
Right.
50 years all at the same time.
And did that propel some of the growth, the fact that people were stuck at home?
Yes. People were stuck. So, right, like, we what we did was when corporations were end of life with their computers, we would actually provide a secure data wiping and then refurbish them and distribute them out to low income folks. And it was a social enterprise model, which was really, really cool. That was why I was so excited about it. Is, instead of the idea was, instead of giving computers to everybody and then going having to beg for money and be preoccupied on that, it was, let's make computers affordable enough that almost everybody can afford it, right? So a desktop for 30, a laptop for 50, and let that market do the work. And that was the really cool thing. So when COVID happened, all the learning had to happen. And there was this like crazy, how do we get computers to kids? And we were like, we get $30, families can afford that. And we were just pumping out computers and responding to the need. And it was really, really neat. And then, of course, for people that couldn't afford it, I remember we were doing a distribution in a school parking lot during COVID. And this lady's like, I got to go pawn my mom's wedding ring so that I can, I can get 30. I was like, you keep the wedding ring. Here's your computer. We got you. Right. So, and then of course grants came in and we were able to make that an official thing.
And I would imagine even charging the small amount that you do to the people that can't afford it, that helps the people that can't even afford that make it
Yeah.
work and help you guys
Yeah.
make it
So
work for
about
them.
70% could, and then that 30% that couldn't, that's where we could do some grants and some fundraising, and a little bit of the $30 goes towards the other kind of 30%. But yeah, talk about it flipped the script, right? So my old gigs, right, the old organization was about maybe 70% foundation donor fund and 30% earned income. And then PCs for People was the opposite, right? About
Wow.
90% earned income and 10% grants and foundations, which
Wow. I
was,
mean, that's amazing. What a model.
yeah, it was
Again, I love these
wonderful. And it
sustainable
really,
models.
yeah, it really let innovation grow, right? Because so much wasn't, we weren't beholden to foundations or funders. We could kind of do what we needed, and it was a perfect time because we could do what we needed in a time of
Yeah.
national crisis, right?
And yeah, I mean, what were you looking for a new role when you ended up with Ended for Good? Were you not? Were you where was your mindset? When you did leave or were preparing to leave PCs for People?
Yeah, it's a great question. It was a lot of soul searching. I was there, like I said, I think 6 years, maybe seven. But like I said, it was COVID years, so it feels like 500. I mean, and it was exhausting, right? So the actual plan was to take the summer off and recoup, and kind of. I've got four wonderful little kids, all under 8 years old, so spend some time with them. And we're not sure what we're gonna do for childcare over the summer. It's like, I'll just take the summer off and find something in the fall. And I wasn't planning to look. And of course, the Ended for Good posting came out like the next day. I was like, I gotta look at this, right? This is cool. And for me, it's that kind of ultimate upstream, right? So like I started, as a high school kid, hanging out with homeless people on the street, right? And saw the issues with mental health, and then saw the issues that with incarceration. They're coming from the shelters, and then the shelters they're coming from the prison, and then we tried pre-release where we get them before they come home from prison to get them a job, and then it's like, man, this is an opportunity to just not send them to prison and not ruin their lives, right? Like we have folks that have this trauma, have mental illness, have whatever it is that is driving them to substance abuse, and adding more trauma through criminal justice system is not the solution, right? The
Yes.
health centered approach is the solution, and being able to go upstream and change that is just a dream come true, right?
Where was, because of your experience, working in those kinds of communities, where was your head at on drug policy when you saw End It for Good? Were you already sort of on board? Did you, meet founder Christina Dent, and then she kind of like showed you the framework, or?
Yeah, no. Yeah, so I remember I was driving with my wife, telling, I had the first interview with Christina, and I didn't tell my wife I was interviewing because we were supposed to take the summer off, right? So I wasn't sure. So I was, I had the first interview, and I was driving with my wife, and I was explaining, that they have, they're interested in, legalizing drugs and focusing on health centered approach. And my wife kind of rolled her eyes, and she goes, I know that's your approach. What is theirs? I said, that is their approach. She goes, I know you've got your own special little code of ethics when it comes to drugs. What's theirs? I said, that's it. It's great.
It's amazing. I mean, absolutely. Myself as a drug policy reform advocate, it's so clear that drug issues need to be treated with compassion, not criminality. And I think that essence is impactful and motivating.
Right, and that just goes back to that little drop-in center that I had when I was in college, right? Like this idea that you don't have to go lock them up, just drop them off, and it was a little church gymnasium, right? And they can hang out here, right? Like, instead of thousands of dollars in booking and law, and legal fees and
And
police
potentially
cruises,
ruining their lives via
yeah,
their
ruining their
record. And
lives, just all of that versus, they hang out with me for 20 minutes and, and life is good again. And then they might even encounter, a counselor and start the road to recovery, right? Just the very different paths there that are possible, right? From an early age, right? For me.
so for those, viewers that may not have listened to either of Christina Dent's episodes, could you just give them a rundown on what End It for Good is?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, Ended for Good was founded about 6 years ago. When Christina Dent, our founder, she's kind of been on this life journey, but it very much started at a younger age with a very conservative Christian from Mississippi. She described it having a lock them up mentality to people that were using, right. They're making bad decisions. They deserve consequences, and her life kind of changed when she became a foster mom and fostered a child whose mother was out of the NICU, and the mother was struggling with addiction, right? And through the experience of being the foster mom and seeing the interaction of the mother with their baby, and that kind of months long process of weekly visitation, she kind of got into this whole rabbit hole of learning about drugs and about addiction and about the drug war, and how incarceration creates more trauma, which creates more substance abuse, which creates more addiction, which creates more crime, right? Like, and the many harms that not only does it hurt the individual, but it hurts our community by putting it into the black market, and gangs and cartels be running it instead of it being out in the open where we can have disputes through a legal method, right? So she kind of went on this whole journey and learned all about it. Started doing TED Talks, and then started an organization called End It for Good, which works to end the drug war and advocate for both health-centered approaches to addiction and drug policy reform.
Yeah, it's awesome. I'm obviously a huge fan of the work and of the organization of Christina. And what was maybe her catalyst for wanting to be in a different role, and like what was sort of the idea of bringing you in and how you were going to make your mark on the organization?
Yeah, absolutely. So she had, gosh, maybe about 2 years ago, decided that she really enjoys the work, but running the organization and kind of the management and the strategic vision isn't really her thing. She really loves the passionate and the presenting and the kind of the mission part of it. So she wanted to step aside and have someone be the CEO. So there was a CEO for about 2 years, a local person in Mississippi, who really kind of helped to get a great foundation there. And then he moved on to the next thing, and that's when they kind of started a national search. And the idea is it's been an incredibly successful organization in Mississippi, and helping to change the hearts and minds of people and get messaging to people that would otherwise not even consider like these kind of conversations. And right, it's a really respectful approach to the kind of conservative Christian Southern demographic. And the idea was, how do we expand that, right? How do we get this like lightning in a bottle? How do we scale it? And I had just kind of finished PCs for People and learned how to scale stuff, and looking to return to this passion of reentry and reform. And I was like, this is perfect. So that's how I arrived there. And I'm hoping to help kind of bring it to both deepen the impact in Mississippi, but also broaden our impact to other states, right?
Yeah.
Where that message, even outside of the South, but into all sorts of corners where our message can resonate.
Yeah, I mean, that's wonderful. That's what needs to happen. I certainly think there's kind of a secret sauce, if you will, to End It for Good, and where you come from, the stories that are told and how they're told, and like you said, the audience that you connect with that might otherwise not even consider this. And to me, that's the ultimate, is like you're able to change the minds that are difficult to change, that are difficult to get open in the first place. It's really impactful. And I think, with my discussions with Christina over the years, I've talked about be great to scale it, but we have to, maintain sort of the personality and the vibe of it. And, I know I'd brainstormed tons of ideas with her over the years, like local chapters of, but you bring all those individual leads of the local chapters together to train them together on how they present and stuff like that. But, I'm curious what your vision is for scaling it.
Yeah, yes, I think we're looking at a couple different pieces, right? So local chapters is one of them. This kind of how do we help people stay engaged on a local level, right? And so much of what we do is kind of that person to person conversation, right? And an invitation to change that way. Being able to scale that, and to your point, that's one of the trickiest part, right? To keep that messaging, keep that tone. So we've been really kind of honing in that message, making it as much of a template's a strong word, right? Like feels sterile, but a supported, branded kind of feeling, right? So being able to create that, and we've got two chapters now in Mississippi, so they're close to Christina, so we can kind of keep that quality control and learn from it.
Right.
And then I'm hopeful to get one started up here in Cleveland, to be able to, just because it's proximity. I see stuff happening in my backyard and feel called
Yeah.
to act, right? And then kind of looking strategically to other locations where it can be, right? And then we have some things that we do just nationally, but just locally, that have national scalability, right? So Christina wrote a wonderful book. I'd be remiss if I didn't
Yeah.
do a plug for it, but it's called Curious, and it's her memoir, her journey, right? That I described earlier, right?
Yeah.
From kind of growing up as
It's a
a
really moving book.
Christian. Pardon?
It's a very moving book.
Yeah,
I
it's so
enjoy it.
great. It's so great. So it's her story of growing up and then fostering and then kind of moving into End It for Good into the movement, right? And really kind of she does it as how she moved intellectually and emotionally through it and spiritually, right? And being able to sit along on that ride with her can be really amazing. So we've got this book. We've got some great kind of other things like white papers, and as we start to do more and more lobbying and advocacy, right? We have all this information. It's easy to kind of copy and paste, right? The book can have a national scale. Our social media reach has a national scale. So kind of that broad touch can really be replicated.
If you're enjoying this episode, I would greatly appreciate if you could review, like, comment, or subscribe on your favorite platforms. Your engaged support goes a long way in helping the show grow and getting our impactful guests heard. Now back to the show. So that in that broad touch sort of help change hearts and minds, help shape culture so that it will affect policy. But it sounds like you're also looking at going directly into the policy sphere.
We are, yeah. So we are, and on issues where we can make a difference, right? There are some things, right, where the culture and the community is just not ready for change, right? So we gotta work on the community, and then there are some places where we want to get ahead of the culture, right? So like one of the most recent things we've been working on is Kratom. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
I am, but share for our audience,
Yeah, but for
please.
those that aren't, it's a kind of an herbal. It's a leaf, natural growing tea. People make tea out of it, and it's used a lot for pain relief. It's a kind of an herbal medicine, and it's also been found to be really effective. So it's not an opiate, but it binds to some of your opiate receptors. So if you're trying to quit using an opiate, it's really helpful in reducing withdrawal symptoms. So multi-purpose, really helpful. Relatively safe compound, right? And there's a lot of states that are kind of knee-jerk reaction, looking at something and saying, "Oh, we got to ban this," right? It's another drug. They heard opiate, shut it down, right? And our concern is that that'll push it back into the black market, right? And will become all the things that we don't want, just like all the other drugs. So it's one of the opportunities that we're working ahead of it before culture's really formed an opinion, trying to create that fact-based messaging, right? And so in Mississippi, we've been able to advocate for and get passed some legislation that's just awaiting signature from the governor. We're first in inches here, but that regulates it, right? And kind of is a great model for us and how we want to approach new substances and existing ones ultimately, right? Where it's a regulated substance, right? Which means 21 and over. It's got a label on it, right? There's no synthetics. There's amounts, right? You know how much of the actual chemicals in there. There's limit to it. Similar to how we do alcohol and tobacco
Yeah.
and Advil, right? So it's a similar approach. So what we're trying to do is get ahead of kind of public opinion with some
Yeah.
policy, and then for some of the policies we got to change public opinion.
Yes. No, I think it's a really good model. I love the idea of, starting with something attainable where you can set an example
Yeah.
um, for other states.
Right. Yeah. So the hope is that we can show that this substance, and they're having some issues with it, like synthetic versions of it being sold in gas stations, and that's not what anybody wants, right? Even the people that use it are like, this is giving a bad name to, it's this sweet little old lady that drinks her tea every morning. She's like, this is giving a bad name to what it is, right?
Myself, as a cannabis consumer and drug policy advocate, that's very frustrating. On the cannabis side, I've been engaged in the space for, about 10 years now. And, it's most of the people that have been in the early stages of the industry have wanted to do things very responsibly and properly, show that this is an industry that can be safely regulated and distributed. But unfortunately, the federal government has been so slow to move that the market's demand has outpaced its ability to move, and a loophole has been found with hemp-derived, intoxicants. And like similar with kratom, there's people selling, Delta 9 hemp-derived THC at the gas station, and it's to cannabis businesses that have been long trying to work within the very tiny framework that they've been given. It's really hurting things, and so it's similar with what you're doing with kratom. Like, I think it is really important to just make these things safe and regulated, tested, and let the demand that is clearly there, go for that instead of this, substance you don't even know what you're getting at the gas
Right.
station. So
Yeah. You don't know what you're getting. What the one lady we were talking to, Sherry, she's like 65 years old. Like I said, she takes it for arthritis. She's like, yeah, we found a wire in the leaves one day. Like, nobody wants that. That's not safe. That's dangerous. Right. And so being able to have that kind of accountability from a manufacturing, right? The percentage of what's in it, and adults, it's for adult use, right? If we, so that's controlled as well. So so that's what we're trying to push, that kind of common sense regulation to a substance instead of the knee jerk lock everybody up who thinks about using it, right?
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you've been working with, disadvantaged populations for a big portion of your life. And, I don't recall how old you said you were, sort of when your family had the life-changing experience when your dad had the brain tumor. But I'm curious, like, where you or your family's eyes would have been on this topic if you'd said this is where you're going to be in, 30 years or whatever it was.
That's a good question. Yeah, so I was 3, but yeah, I think my family's been incredibly supportive, and I'd say unsurprised. I mean, to a good point, right? Like they almost expect this kind of stuff, and yeah, like when I told my dad I was working on it, he goes, "Yep, that tracks, right?" It was like, "Yep, right." Like that makes more sense, right?
Sounds like they're supportive, and just in
Yeah,
general in
right. He's like,
life.
yeah, it makes more sense than you selling computers. You're not a nerd. Right? You're gonna. So yeah, so it was very much something that tracks in who I am, and just our approach, and
Yeah.
yeah.
So, you've mentioned ways that you're looking to scale at it for good and scale the impact. Are there any particular additional initiatives that you're really excited about, or maybe that you see a few years down the road?
Yeah. So we're kind of we did this whole kind of really focused kratom campaign in Mississippi, which was wonderful and pretty effective. We found some really great people to kind of tell the story and stuff, and we've got a lot of those talking points. And like even in Ohio, they're starting to gear up against it, right? So I think there's a real opportunity, and if there's other states that are listening that kratom is working on a ban, or that stuff's bubbling, we'd love to help kind of share that messaging, share the the talking points, and even help advocate where we can, right? I think that's like like one of those things, like I was saying, where we have stuff in Mississippi that's very easy, scalable, copy and paste type stuff. And yeah, so I think there's kind of things like that where we can start that message. We have the book Curious. If there's anybody that's interested in book clubs, I think there's a really great way to have a conversation. We have book clubs all across the country that read the book and share and make that change, and those kind of then become the planters for the chapters, and then the bigger growth, right? So there's and it starts with a book, right? So if people are interested, they can check out the book on Amazon. It's Curious by Christina Dent. Yeah, and then of course, right, we're looking at kind of a more of a formal office up in Ohio, where I'm at, to really start ushering some change in my backyard. But then also looking at where could that next kind of strategic state that we can play a role
Yeah.
in be, right? So
So a couple questions on that. One, I'm pretty sure I had a note that I think it's the first 5 people to reach out. Uh,
yeah.
can get a
Absolutely. Yeah.
free
If they'd like
copy
a
of
free book, yeah,
Curious?
they can reach out. They can email us at curious@endedforgood.com. And yeah, happy to
Awesome.
send them some free books. We got some funding through a grant to make them free for folks. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful journey to go on.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I highly recommend that to those listening. And you mentioned sort of being in Cleveland, seeing things going around on the ground. That's sort of a catalyst for this element that you are starting there. And I'm curious if there's people that are listening in, random city, state, USA, and they're feeling that same way. Can they reach out to you guys for at least advice on what they should do?
I would say absolutely, right? If they're, feel free. You can email me. I'm Bryan at End It For Good, and I'm always happy to chat with folks, right? I think if there is somebody locally that's willing to champion it, we're happy to support, to be there, to do whatever we can to help, right? It just, like I said, so much of it is already existing, right? We can share information and also learn information, right? Not to say that we're the end all be all on stuff, right? We've got something that worked, hopefully work again, and we can learn from it the next time around.
Yeah, and I would say that values aligned individuals that are really passionate about this topic, they could probably like as hard as they're going to push, you guys will help.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Yes. Yeah. If there's the drive, we'll be there. Right. And, if we can find that, because that's the real kind of, catalyst for change, right? Is that local champion that wants to do it. Right. Without that, that's one of the things I learned at PCs for people. We had our, you know, all of our strategic markets that we wanted to go to, but ultimately where we went boiled down to where do we have that person locally that wants to see this happen. Right. Because it's really hard to, be in another state trying to exert your will on something, right? It has to be something that the local people, local boots on the ground, local hearts and mind want. And it starts with somebody locally interested. So if you're out there listening, we want to help you, right? We're here for you.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's one person can truly affect change. So that's the message that we want to get to the people listening as well is like, if this is something you're really passionate about, here's an organization that can help give you the fuel for your fire. So
Absolutely. Right now I'm the one person in Ohio. So if you're out in Ohio, you want to join me, great. If you're
I
in
love that. So you've worked in, we've talked about all these great things that you've done over the years to help people, like in the different communities that you've worked in, and sort of the chain of hardship that you've sort of been through in different elements. And I think you've probably mentioned a couple, but is there any particular story that just really hits you about the effect that you had on someone's lives, or someone came up to you and told you directly?
Oh gosh, yeah. There's been a lot. Um, yeah, there's been a lot. There's one. She's a really good friend. She's become a really great friend. And she actually was in the culinary training program. Met her through it. She was actually serving a significantly longer sentence and was kind of recruited to be a teacher volunteer, right? So she went through the training program. She got the associate's degree and then became a teacher of the program, right, to help kind of pay it forward. And that was kind of the model. But gosh, the more we got to know her, the more she just didn't belong in prison, right? Yeah, no, her story was effectively her dealer was out of the room. She used some of the drugs. Got super nervous that she was going to get in trouble. She was like, "He's going to kill me," right? So she went out and robbed a pharmacy to to get drugs to put there, right? I mean, so just kind of a train of bad decisions, right? Like bad. Don't get me wrong, but the kind of the background of her life, really, really sad, really challenging, and it was a bad decision at a bad moment, right? But like I think it was 20 years. It's just excessive, right? So we helped to work with the judge, and she got her out on judicial release, and now she's just like this amazing reintegrated person. She's got a new baby that's so cute. She's got a dog. She's married. I mean, just like the perfect reintegration. Well, she's going to get married. I'm going to her wedding in October. We're still friends. We talk. So just yeah, her journey from her childhood has been so challenged. I mean, just a heart wrenching story of of abuse and trauma and just the deck stacked against her, right? And it all culminated in one really bad decision, right? Right, and then being able to see her turn it all around
It's absolutely moving, incredible story, and it's, sadly also makes me think of all the people that are inside that have tremendous potential, that did one thing, that had one mistake, that has stolen that from them, but they're still in there. The potential is still there. I believe every human has tremendous potential, and that that you were able to help this individual cultivate theirs is amazing. And I hope that your work is a continued effort uh, toward that, so that people's worst decisions don't completely ruin their lives. And it's a concept I talk about with people just when they hear that I'm in criminal justice reform, but like, oh, but those people did that, like, and I just don't think there's any individual that should be judged for a single worst mistake.
Yeah, right. One of my things I always say, they just had one really bad day, right? Like we've all had a day where if it went a little bit farther south, it could have been me in jail, right? Like where if we all just have we're a couple bad string of bad decisions from being in a whole lot of trouble, right? And it can happen to everybody, but also there are some folks that really just have that deck stacked against them, right?
Exactly. When you
Where
add up the trauma element and
the trauma, not having family, not having, resources, right? If you're born in poverty with no family, with no support, and then trauma on top of that, and then, right, and nowhere to turn, right? Drugs become the only thing to numb you to be able to get through. And then it becomes you're just on that margin, right? A day away from. So yeah, so that's where getting to that root cause of that trauma, right? Instead of waiting for it to explode, right? We know there are folks out there that are hurting. We know that there are people that need us, right? And sometimes it's just that simple. Hey, hi, how are you? Here's a hot dog, right? Not to be corny, but that can be. I really believe that makes a difference, right? And then following that up with actual like therapeutic help. Gosh, we could save so much more trauma, so much more harm, so much money, so much. It could be such a better place, the world.
I do, absolutely. And but there's people like you and the other guests I've had on the podcast, and so many more people that are doing amazing work every day to push us in the right direction. And I like to think that the good significantly outweighs the bad. Unfortunately, the bad gets magnified, especially for our social media culture, our clicks culture. But there's a lot of great people doing great work like yourself, so I thank you for it.
Yeah, that was my pleasure. It's my pleasure.
Throughout your career, has there been anyone in particular that's been a really impactful mentor for you?
Oh gosh, yeah. There's been some really, really impactful folks. I was actually just thinking of a quote from the gentleman back in my high school that really got me involved in the homeless, right? And there are, a lot of folks that we encounter that have stories that have done bad things, right? Like but that doesn't mean they're bad people, right? And I remember like struggling with that, like, man, this guy, like, he told me his life story, and that's kind of heavy, like, at 16, right? And he was my really great mentor, and he goes, yeah, but you got to remember that everybody used to be somebody's baby, little baby, right? And somebody had a mother or a father that loved them unconditionally, right? They dial back the clock to that day, right? And try to see them like that was his message, right? And gosh, man, like just remembering that almost everybody has that parent out there that loved them unconditionally, right? Or if they don't, then gosh, man, that's even more
That's
heartbreaking.
the deck is immediately stacked against you if you don't
Yeah,
have
but
that. And
this kind of idea that everybody was innocent once,
yeah,
everybody started different, and then things happened, right?
yeah,
But that person's
yeah.
still in there. And
Coincidentally, I had a similar thought recently. I have two young boys,
uh-huh.
and I just think about like one day who they're going to be, hopefully, and God willing. And then I did it. Just I had this exact thought. I was thinking to my mom, and I'm like thinking back to like when she was a little baby and like who she is now. And it's every single person has been there. That's something I think about a lot with my boys as they're growing up. Is just like everybody's gone through this in one way or another. We can all do it, and there's a lot to get out of it. There's also, as a parent, I think about all the impact that I know I'm having, conscious or not, on their futures. And I think it's an important element to keep in mind. And I think that it also circles us back to the fact that there's all these people incarcerated that have tremendous potential.
Yeah, 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 and just yeah, they've got so much potential. They've got yeah, and I think so many of them. I don't, I think there's this real. because I think something like 80% of folks are incarcerated, depending on your state. Some 60 to 80% are on a drug offense, right, drug related. And again, about 70% of those are dual diagnosis, right, mental health and addiction, right. So precursors for that are trauma, right? So just this idea that and I think there's this myth that people in there are just like bad people, right? They're just doing push-ups and sharpening shivs and and stuff like that, right? And I when I was at LMM, I probably spent more time in prison than I did in my office on any given day, right? So I've been to many prisons, I've been to met with many folks, and by and large, they're good people, right? There are people that have made mistakes. There are people that are paying their debt to society, and most of them don't even fault that. They're like, yeah, I screwed up. But
Yeah.
are we as a community giving them what they need to be successful, right?
Yeah.
They're playing their part and say, okay, all right, punish me, right? But is that what they need as a community, right? Are we setting up for success both before and after their incarceration? I think is the questions we got to start to look at, right? If we're
Yeah.
serious about it. I think it's easy to just blame them and say they're bad people, but they're people, right? They were somebody's baby at some point,
Yeah.
and they're part of our community.
Agreed. It's a wonderful perspective, and if you'd like, this is the point at which you can ask me a question. A lot of people ask about how I started the podcast, so we can skip that one.
Well, I like to ask, what is your origin story, right? If you're a superhero comic, what's your origin story, right? Your radioactive spider.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I think that's a really good way to ask it. Certainly, those interested, there's a couple episodes where I do really dig into it, but the quick version is how I think of what my origin story is that I my four grandparents are Polish Holocaust survivors, and my dad was born in Israel. My grandparents and dad immigrated and um, lived on nothing for so long and worked their way up. My parents lived in a trailer when they got married, and just kept working really hard. And but if I go all the way back to the survival of my grandparents, like those are all things I feel not only the need, but an honor, honestly, to have the option to do justice for. So towards, I'm trying to use the life that statistically I probably shouldn't have, given all that they went through, and just make the most of it, create positive impact, you know, pass along positive things to my kids and to the next generation, and really just do justice the tremendous opportunity that they gave me. And um, I guess my origin story is really my family.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Right.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, that's a good question. And for you, let's take family out of the equation. Aside from family,
Mm-hmm.
what are you most grateful for?
Oh gosh. This might sound weird. So I'm dyslexic. So I have a real hard time reading. And but that's also my superpower, right? As a fellow entrepreneur, right? Like one of the biggest things is like being worried about failing, right? Right? And that's I think one of the biggest deterrent for people. But like from a young age, I couldn't read. I was bringing home C's and D's to my family all the time, right? So I'm not worried about letting them down. They still supported me through all that, right? So that fear of failure and some other, there's a Malcolm Gladwell does a great chapter in one of his books. It's called "You Wouldn't Wish Your Son to Be Dyslexic, or Would You?" Right? And it's about like this how being dyslexic creates like I can't read, but I'm really good listener, right? And I read people better, right? So it makes me a little bit stronger interpersonally, right? When I'm under a bridge talking to somebody, or whatever it might be, right? So just this idea of kind of just biologically who I am has turned into kind of personality, how I am, and
Yeah.
a bit of my superpower, right, has made me. Not scared to try something new, in tune to what's around me in a different way, and I get headaches when I read too much.
Well, I mean, I think it's remarkable though to take that perspective. Like, how can we look at the things that some others might consider fault and look at them as blessings?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
There's a silver lining to everything.
And so to sort of piggyback, what you're grateful for, you've done a lot of really amazing things to help a lot of people throughout your career. Is there something that you've done that you're most proud of?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. I don't know. There's been some great moments, right? And I think, you know, yeah, we've done some really, I've been blessed to be part of some really cool things, right? Like at PCs for People, we built a 5G network for Cuyahoga County, the county that I'm in Cleveland, right? And it was a $20 million project, and it brought 5G internet to communities that didn't have it before, which was really cool. And right, that it was again a part where that dyslexic in me, right, was not afraid to try, but also I've kind of learned to be an autodidact and teach myself stuff. So I learned everything about how to run wireless internet in about a year. I just kind of sat down and watched a whole lot of YouTube and got enough to be dangerous, right? So that was a really cool achievement. There's an amazing uh, documentary that followed a couple of the people from the culinary program, a couple of the women in the program, a couple of moms who had been incarcerated through our culinary arts program, and then into their release and reintegration and then success in their life. And that documentary just came out maybe a year or two ago, which was a little bit of a blast from the past because it's been five,
Right.
6 years, right? Because they kept following them, and that was a really cool moment too. I just see that they're doing well, and the stories continue, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Do you
called.
know where people can watch the doc or what it's called?
Yeah, it's on PBS. And it's called Our Time, or I'm sorry, Her Time. And it's yeah, I can certainly send the
Yeah, we'll
link.
be sure to link it in the
Yeah,
show notes. That
it's
sounds
really
really
it's on
fascinating.
PBS. It's a really amazing. It's the story of some of the people I was telling, and just their life through, and
Yeah.
yeah. So that one's really really awesome, and really kind of a tangible moment of where like
Yeah.
you can kind of point to like, yeah, I played a role in that. I'm in it for like half a second. I'm like a cameo in the background, which
Nice.
is great. That's where I want to be.
Yeah.
But my big claim to fame, and yeah. So a
Awesome.
lot of a
Well,
lot of cool little moments like that.
awesome. Yeah, thank you for sharing. I look forward to checking out that doc. And now we're gonna sort of step a little bit even wider. And for the last big question, I love to ask every guest: if you could snap your fingers and fix one thing in the world, what would it be, and how do you think that change would reverberate?
Who that is, gosh. My knee jerk on this is so I mentioned earlier, right? I'm a real data driven person. I like to look at numbers and facts and then follow those, right? Like, I have my opinions, right? We have theories, right? But like, I'm a big fan of like data and the scientific method, right? And that, and gosh, if I could snap my fingers, it'd be like to make people data driven, right? Or like, and mainly social media, right? If we could put data into social media and like, gosh, I think we could really change some of the discourse, right? On all sorts of things, right? If we, I think we all have our preconceived notions, right? I'm guilty of it. I'm sure you are too, right? We all have it, right? But if we could find a way to have that data present, I mean, we could technologically, right? There's AI that could grab the actual facts on whatever we're debating, right?
But
At the
no one
moment,
will ever trust the data. You're never going to get everyone to trust the data
right?
source,
Yeah,
right?
there,
That's the
there's that
frustrating
too.
part.
But right, like if we could find a way to make data trustable, right, like pure
Yeah.
data, and have it there for people, and for people to look at it, right, I think that would be the start of changing a whole
Yes.
lot of things in our world, right? I mean,
Imagine
there
during
is a
an argument if you could actually just look at the data and then have continue the conversation.
right,
You
yeah,
know.
yeah, like we can still argue about it, but let's
Yeah.
let's start with facts. Right, and we can still both end the conversation where we started, but at least we went through facts and looked at what's happening, right? I think that is for me, because so much of my life, right, it has been seeing things happen on the streets, right, in very traumatic emotional sense. But I think that's why I got into sociology. It was like, I need to see the data behind what's actually happening here, right? Like, there's this really gut emotional reaction, but what's actually like happening on a meta version, macro version of what's happening, right? And for me, that I think could help change so many problems, right? If we started to approach things in dialogue, right, respectful dialogue, and fact based dialogue, right? I think that would be great. So I don't know what that is for snapping my fingers. That's a long snap.
Oh, I mean, I just look at like trustworthy data being widely available, to everyone in every situation, and I certainly think it would have reverberating effects, even just to keep minds a little more open.
Yeah, right. And yeah. I think, and we're close there as a civilization to be able to have that. I mean, there will always be some things that are challenging, but we're close. We're probably closest we've ever been to being able to look at facts on stuff. But I think getting further from wanting to, paradoxically, right? So
Well, I really appreciate that answer. I like the data element to it. And I know that people that are watching and listening are certainly inspired by all of your work. How can they best support you and your impact?
yeah. So certainly, End It for Good is a nonprofit organization, and donations are greatly appreciated. We're an advocacy organization that's making a real effort and intentional choice to not get into like corporation based funding, right? So when we look at Kratom, no, we've got no funding from big kratom, as it were, right? We're just looking at the facts and the society, right, and the people, and making recommendations, right? So that private individual, those private funding, that's huge, right? So if being able to help and continue to do that is huge. Connections to people both that want to be that champion locally, or who know people who can be that champion, right? Whether those are legislators or just local advocates. Always happy to talk with anybody and kick around what we know and brainstorm ideas.
Awesome. And yeah, hopefully people will reach out to Curious at enditforgood.com so they can get their copy of Curious, Christina's dense, incredible book. There's also, I think it's episode maybe 4 and 94 that she's on, or her too. So
Yep.
if people want to learn more about End It for Good, they can go to those as well. And I just want to thank you so much for being here. I really enjoyed having you and speaking with you and learning about your story.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It was great to share some time with you.
Thanks for checking out this episode of People Are the Answer. For more information, go to peoplearetheanswer.com. Please like, subscribe, rate, whatever you can do on various platforms. We really appreciate the support. And if you're interested, check out my other podcast, The Late Game Podcast. You can learn more at thelategame.com. Thanks.